I remember growing up going to the grocery store and people just looking at us like something was weird. And so there's this feeling of, I know I don't quite fit in here, but at the same time, this is all I've ever known. So how can I not fit here? And so I think that led to like growing up, especially like in my teen years, those identity things coming up, especially in high school. I was never black enough for my black friends and I was never white enough for my white friends. And so constantly having that in between of like, well, where am I supposed to go? I think in my adulthood, in adulthood, what that's led to is like feeling not necessarily uncomfortable in black spaces, but feeling like an imposter syndrome. Like feeling like I don't really belong here. Like I can't say that I've experienced things that people who grew up in black households experienced. So it's like it's like a hard feeling of like I feel like an imposter. Like I feel like I can't sit here and tell you about the black experience because I didn't grow up with that experience. So yeah.
I think we're good to go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to November's edition of Hairitage Talks. It's National Adoption Month, and this year we are embracing two very special adoptees, stories of love, identity, and belonging. Let's welcome Kiante Conger and Tony Parsons. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thanks
We
for having
also
us.
have our co-host, Luke Mitchell.
I'm back.
Welcome
I'm
to the
back.
show. So let's get started with a little bit about your story. So let's start with Tony first. Who is Tony Parsons?
Oh man, how much time do we have? Who is Tony Parsons? Well, at the core of it, I am an uncle. I'm a brother. I'm a transracial adoptee. I'm one of 24 children in my family. 22 of us are adopted. I'm the eldest of the 11 black children in my family. It's interesting. We only have black and white. My parents never expanded to other ethnicities, but we are 11th if you were to kind of line us up end to end. But the way my life kind of worked out is I got to be the baby for the first 11 years, so the rules didn't apply to me. And then for the next 8 years of my adolescence, I was the oldest in the house, so I got to kind of set the rules. But then being 11th is like I kind of am made to break the rules. So I kind of got it from all sides, which is really cool. Outside of family stuff, I am a policy professional. I spent time working in Washington, D.C. I now work in the Bay Area of California doing public policy work, which is kind of my life's calling. I really believe if we're going to change the world, you got to be able to change the policies and laws that affect the world. At the end of the day, I just try to make the world a better place. And my goal in life is to be the third black president of the United States. It's going to be huge, okay, bigly. And so, yeah, every day we're just kind of learning more and more, but that's kind of who I am, at least today.
Okay, well, sounds good to me. Sounds like you might have my votes. And Kiante, same question. Who is Kiante Conger, and what's your adoption story?
Well, transracial adoptee. I am the only adopted child in my family. So in my adopted family, plus I was the only one adopted out of all of my biological siblings. So I grew up in Houston, Texas, and where it's hot, humid all the time, and then moved to East Texas. I am the baby of the family, on both sides, actually, biological and adoptive. I grew up in a smaller town in Houston, so like a smaller like suburb. So, growing up with people who look like me wasn't a huge aspect of my environment, but there were some. I would say it wasn't until I went off to college that I met people, like more people who looked like me, and that was more normal for me. So yeah, now I am working in the like adoption field. So I've been in the foster care and adoption world for the last 8+ years. So started as like a case manager, going into homes with kiddos in foster care, visiting them, making sure they're doing okay. Then I moved into like placing kiddos into homes and within the foster care system. And now I have the opportunity to work for an adoption agency in Texas. And so I work with adult adoptees. It's a large part of my job. And so like helping them locate their birth family and counseling them through that.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, I'm really excited about today's show because I had the opportunity to ask our transracial adoptive parents to send in questions that they wanted to know most from you. And so just know that these questions really come from the heart of the Styles for Kids community, and those who regularly listen to the podcast, and mainly our parent advocacy groups. So we started an advocacy program this year where we bring parents together around issues related to race and adoption and also hair care. So they have a space to be able to talk and gather and communicate what their needs are from our community. So these questions come from them, okay? First up is, how did being part of a transracial family impact your sense of racial identity growing up, and how does it affect you today as an adult? From any of you.
Interesting. I'm happy to go first because I think this is something that I am still working through. I just recently turned 30 in the last few months. And so when I was adopted in 1997, right, I like to say I was born into foster care. I never actually had the opportunity to meet my biological family at all. But I was adopted by an all-white family at the time. And we lived in an all-white community. I went to an all-white school where the only other person of color is quite literally my best friend to this day. I am the godfather to her children. But I grew up not knowing I was black. I thought that every person was born black and then we became white. And if I had my shirt off, you'd see I have a big white mark on my side. So it's like, oh, look, it's happening. And so around the age of 10, I vividly remember like being in the bathroom with, you ever seen like one of those Brillo pads and like scrubbing at my skin because I wanted to look like the rest of my family. And, I love my mom and dad very, very much, but I wish they had talked about that more openly, right? And I know that they tried with things like celebrating Kwanzaa once, but it was like a once and done thing. It was never a long-term discussion that we'd ever had. And, in the mid 2000s growing up, all you ever saw, especially living in Metro Detroit, was just negative, pictures of what the black and brown community is and what it was. And I think it really made me afraid to be black, to understand and kind of embrace that. And so by the time I got to high school in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, I was like very much afraid of other black people. And I can vividly remember my siblings being like, dude, you were a part of this, whether you want to be or not. And so it's been a lifelong learning journey since then to kind of embrace my own blackness. And like, I think it's been really helpful to see, almost like a 180 of what the black and brown community is. Like, we're uplifting leaders like Kamala Harris, like your Barack Obamas, like your Malcolm X's, like your MLKs, right? They're everyday black and brown individuals who do great things. And I think I'm coming to terms with the fact that like my blackness is for me to decide and define. But I really do think my parents could have done more and needed to have done more to help me kind of lean into that identity from a young age rather than pretending like it was not there to begin with.
Do you ever think that, I think for me, we have similar backgrounds. Adopted in a mostly white community, homeschooled to public, then to private, right? And for so long, up to the last few months, I've really realized like I can't really I want to blame my family for not giving me everything, and pushing me into figure out what is my real blackness, right? And they didn't have these groups, they didn't have these things, they didn't have people like you. In the adoption world who's advocating, right? They didn't have anybody like you who can super articulate, who's doing work with policy work in California and is a spokesperson, right? Or anybody like us.
Yeah.
And so yes, was it hard for me? Yeah. Did I compensate a lot? All the time, right? But I don't, I sit here and I'm like, oh, what if? Like for me, like I can't look back and be upset anymore. I have to look forward, move forward and be like, hey, what can I do different? Yeah. How can I help the next gen that comes in, right? And I think a lot of it too is advocating for black families who to adopt. also, right? Not just the white families. And I love, like, I have some friends that want to adopt, and they're white, and I love them. But that urge for the black community to, hey, let's adopt. Yeah. And what about you? I'm curious to hear yours.
So, kind of a similar like take on things with my family. When people would ask me like, "How did you know you were adopted?" And I'm like, "Well, if you look at me and you look at my parents, I didn't know what the word was, but I knew something wasn't right." And so I knew from a really young age, and I remember like internalizing it from a really young age. And so my parents actually have a picture of me where they left me alone for I don't know what, and they were painting the garage, and so they were using white paint, and when they came back I had painted myself completely white. And my parents were like, "Why would you do that?" And I was like, "Because I want to be like you. I want to look like you. I don't want to stand out." I remember growing up going to the grocery store and people just looking at us like something was weird. And so there's this feeling of, I know I don't quite fit in here, but at the same time, this is all I've ever known. So how can I not fit here? And so I think that led to like growing up, especially like in my teen years, those identity things coming up, especially in high school. I was never black enough for my black friends, and I was never white enough for my white friends. And so constantly having that in between of like, well, where am I supposed to go? I think in my adulthood, in adulthood, what that's led to is like feeling not necessarily uncomfortable in black spaces, but feeling like an imposter syndrome. Like feeling like I don't really belong here. Like I can't say that I've experienced things that people who grew up in black households experienced. So it's like it's like a hard feeling of like, I feel like an imposter. Like I feel like I can't sit here and tell you about the black experience because I didn't grow up with that experience. So
I piggyback on that. I didn't go to a barbershop until I was 22, 23 years old. And it was because me going in there and asking, hey, what kind of hair, what kind of haircut should I get? Right? Why are you 22 years old and not knowing what haircut you're going to get? And so it's in another podcast we've done, but long story short, I sat for 2 years in the parking lot wanting to go in to the barbershop, and I couldn't because I felt like an imposter. I didn't want them to know that I was an imposter, right? So yeah, I echo and I hear you.
I will say, my parents did do a good job with the hair piece of that. Like, I'm bald. And like,
I was going to say.
We'll get into why I'm bald in a
I
second.
don't think this is your moment.
I will say, my parents were very cognizant of ensuring that all of my barbers were black men and women. I think they recognized that they didn't have the expertise to like take care of my head. However, that didn't preclude them from allowing me to grow an afro and then getting a perm and then getting it relaxed, like boom, bang, boom, which is why I think I'm bald now. I'm 30, y'all, and I'm bald. Like, thank God we have a nice head shape, but like, I really appreciate that I think that was an intentional effort by them to at least try to support me in that capacity growing up. But so I really appreciate that. And if I can follow up on a question, you place children now, right? Like at the agency, right? You're doing that work.
So I did that previously.
You did that previously.
Not currently, no.
Okay. But I'm curious because it ties to a point that you had made around like black families needing to adopt, because I completely agree with that. When you would place children, were you finding that that the families that you were working with were like representative of the children that you were placing, right? Because under the Interethnic Placement Act and the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act, like race can no longer be a determining factor in that placement. However, under reasonable efforts, which is part of the Title 4E, like, foster care work, right? Reasonable efforts would state that you need to be able to place children in places where they feel safe, connected, which to me, there's a racial part of that, right? Like if I'm a black person, I'm probably going to feel more ease with a black home. I'm curious, like, were you able to do that when it made sense? Obviously, like keeping the law, to the letter of the law, but I always wonder about that. Like, are agencies holding up reasonable efforts to make those connections?
I would say, I don't think that it's like, so to answer your question shortly, no. And I don't think it's like a personal thing, or I think it's just how, like, who the people are that are trying to become parent, like a foster or adoptive parents. And I think a lot of times, especially like CPS, like when you've got kids who are sleeping in offices, they're so concerned with we need a placement for this child.
Yep.
And so because of that, they're like, yes, while we care about that, it tends to like get put on the back burner a bit. So I think like I would say no. I think that's also because of like the circumstances of who's you know, becoming foster and adoptive parents.
Yeah. Question. This is gonna be great. I'm actually super excited about this podcast.
Yes, I am too.
You want to?
Yeah, we're going to the next one.
Yeah.
So parents want to know. Sometimes exposing children to more diverse environments like a new school or church means losing established caring friends or community. How would you navigate this balance between belonging and exposure to diversity?
Let me go first on this one.
Yeah, sure.
I love this one.
Yes.
I love this one.
Let's go. Let's go.
So, my daughter, I'm gonna talk about. We put her into a private school in the beginning. Okay, I did the more comfortable thing, right? And she really had a hard time academically. She had some great friends there, but yet she didn't have to say it, but there was uncomfortability, right? So we pulled her out. Now, no one ever really pulls their kid out of private and puts them in the public. Usually it's the other way around. Put her into public. Now, my daughter was having tics, right? Biting her nails, and she'd roll her eyes and do different things. And put her into public. And the first week, she was freaking out. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. She went. And you know what? She came to me and she said, Dad, she goes, everyone looks like me. And I go, yeah. She's like, this is great. And I was like, yeah. Tics were gone. Biting the nails, gone. She's comfortable in her skin. She loves her skin. She loves her hair. She loves who she is. Now, to piggyback that, we still have white friends. We still have friends from that same other school. We still love them, right? But it's something that I never got. I'm giving it to my child, and my child is thriving. Yeah. And they can go into a group. They can go into a group with black people. They can go into a group with Mexicans. They can go into a group with white people, Asians, and they feel comfortable. Yeah. And they're like, they're not imposters. Right. They are who they are, and this is how they are. They're loud and obnoxious at times, but they are comfortable, and they know who they are. Yeah. So that's where I'm at with that.
It's important. Yes. And you guys?
I don't view it as losing. I think it's gaining, right? I would want to reframe that conversation just a little bit, right? So similarly, my parents had me in private school from, pre-threes all the way up to 8th grade, and, majority white, and like, I love my white friends. They're fantastic. And like, we're all still very close. But then I went to a public high school, and of course there's a culture shock. There was much more students. There was like 50 kids in my entire private school. And I was like an hour to school with, 2,000 people. I was like, I've never seen this many people in one place. But I never felt like I was losing those friends who chose to go to the private high school that was much more, less, it was less diverse. I never felt like I was losing them. So I think you can expose them, and you should do it soon and early, not wait till they're 15, without having to say you're going to lose people. Now, growing up, there's that natural matriculation of friends. Is like, am I as close to them as I once was? No, but like, I'm also 30 now. And I think that it doesn't have to be a loss. I think it can be a gain. And I think we show up in different spaces in different ways, right? The way I go to work is not the same way I go out to the gym, right? And I think you can be in different spaces and still be comfortable. And, if you can bring those two worlds, if you want to think about it in that way together, fantastic. If not, there's nothing wrong with keeping them separate. I think you can still show up in the way that you need to show up. But don't let the fear of potential loss that might come with it be a reason to not expose them, right? Like, I think you do them much more harm if you're not giving the opportunity to be exposed, and let them kind of go at their own pace, right? Like, I really resented my parents for like throwing me into the deep end. I was like, I don't know anything. I don't know where the school is. I don't know what's going on here. But by the time I was a senior, I loved it. But I think had we had much more exposure in small doses, I think it would have been much better for me. And then going to Michigan State University for undergrad, where I went from a school of 2,000 to a school of 52,000, and seeing a lot more persons of color, not just black, also was really helpful for my own development too. And like, those are people I'm still in close contact with. Like, and we all live literally all around the globe now. And I don't feel like I lost my friends from high school because I went to Michigan State. I don't feel like I lost my friends from, middle school because I went to a public high school. I just feel like I've gained a better perspective and a lot more exposure to things that I had never even thought possible prior to kind of getting those opportunities.
I like your take on like not seeing it as like a loss. Like it's more of a yes and. So like especially like I think in my experience, like having to, it almost feels like you're asking your child to choose. Like you can either have these friends or you can have these. And I feel like it's yes and. You can have both. And I think to not have both, you're limiting your child's world experience. And so I think like that's the beauty of it, is like getting to experience those different things. So yeah, I don't really want to like seeing it as a loss sounds so harsh. But yeah.
Well, I want to say what I've observed from my side of things is it seems that, because I have someone right now she's in her senior year of college and trying to decide between HBCU, predominantly white university, and of course getting some influence from her family. But what I see on this side and what I've seen is that the more uncomfortable parents are is where they lose that sense of trying to create the balance. And now it's about my uncomfortability as opposed to what's best for my child. So what do you say to that parent out there who's really just not making it a priority because they're uncomfortable?
This is gonna sound harsh.
Say it with your chest. Say it with your chest.
Right?
But you have to put your feelings on the back burner. It's about your child, and working with the millions of adult adoptees that I have, the amount of them that were like, I just don't understand why this wasn't a priority to my parents. And so like when I hear parents say those things, I'm like, the one thing that your child will remember is that you chose you over them. Yes. That is the one thing that they will remember after this. So like you have to put your own personal feelings aside. Like, yes, you can be scared for them. Yes, you can be worried about what might happen, but you have to put those things aside and not put them onto your child, like not project those things on either. But all the one thing that you can do is prepare them. If you're worried about it, prepare them for that, like go alongside them, because if you try to keep them from it, they're just going to do it anyway. And then it's going to cause a rift in your relationship. So in the long run, it's better just to put yourself aside and be there for your child.
And name that uncomfortability. Like I want you, all the parents are listening. You are a good parent if you can say, this makes me uncomfortable and I don't know. Like you've got to be able to say that to your kid, because if we think that if we perceive that to be the case and you can't name it, then we don't even know how to approach this with you when we have these thoughts. So like, I want to do these things, and I'm fortunate that because with my work at the Center for Adoption Support and Education, like we do a lot with our parent groups to talk about that stuff, right? I just wish that my parents had told me I don't know when I had asked them about my adoption story instead of making it up, right? I wish they would have said, it's uncomfortable for us to have to talk about this with you. Let's go find a therapist, right? Like things that I think would have been, to me at least, in our year of 2024, that I think would be so simple. I understand that it could be really hard for a parent because you don't want this notion of like, oh, if I'm giving them this exposure, then that means our relationship is suffering. It's not. Your relationship, to your point, your relationship will start to suffer if you can't be uncomfortable because you love me. If you love me, you will be willing to be uncomfortable for me.
Yes, I love that. I think as a parent too, like in knowing my family, they did try the best they could, right? And there are things now that I'm realizing that they did, and I don't know if you guys deal with trauma, and we're gonna talk about this. Okay. But there are things that I now know they did that because of the trauma, and because because of that, I blocked out. And I'm just realizing some things now. We're gonna get into that. Her and I are gonna get into that in another podcast. But if that door isn't open to these children to be able to express and to be able to ask questions, right? And the parents can't answer. And we always say, right? We've said this before, go get yourself a black friend, right? Go get yourself a black friend. Go get yourself a person of color. It's easier for that child to be in a home where their family and their whole family, it's normal that they're hanging out with Uncle Johnny down the street, right? Or it's easier for, we go into church and people of color are everywhere, for them to feel more comfortable in their skin. If there's one little aspect of their lives that reminds them of who they are, reminds them of safety and security, it will end up being a little bit like a more of a beautiful thing for the family, right? And the parents will be able to piggyback on that. And I mean, there's no book on adopting, like how to raise a. There is tons of books, but there's no of having those conversations. But I would say uncomfortability is uncomfortability is a safe and an okay thing to feel and to be in. And if you're in that area and if you're in that space right now, keep being uncomfortable. But like, ride with that. Use that to fuel it, because guess what? That child is uncomfortable in your home.
Yes.
Right? That child is in his room feeling disconnected, feeling alone. He's at school compensating for who he isn't, right? He's a black kid. She's a black girl in his school that, one, doesn't understand her. She doesn't understand herself. She can't verbalize it. She can't come up to you, your mom and dad, and say, hey, I feel this way because of my skin. Hey, mom and dad, hey, I need to go get my hair done. Can you take me to this place? Right? They're not going to walk down the street and go find a barbershop. So parents, it's okay not to know.
Yeah.
Go find that help. Go find that somebody who can help.
Yes, and press into the uncomfortable. That's all I always say. Press into it.
But if we keep saying these parents, if we keep saying, oh, it's the uncomfortability is bad. It's not, right?
It's good.
Because I was uncomfortable taking my daughter out of the school for a while. Why? It's because I felt like I needed to give her the education that I got. Well, you're still getting the same education and more at the school that she's in, right?
In a place where she's comfortable.
And a place where she's comfortable, right?
Yes.
So
next up, parents want to know, how have your feelings about hair care and its cultural significance evolved as an adult? What do you wish your adoptive parents had known or done differently in regards to your hair? If anything.
I want to hear yours. Come on now.
That is loaded for me. So from the time that I was adopted until I was about 22, 23, I got my hair relaxed. So at 3, I was getting relaxers in my hair.
Can you explain what that is?
So for those that don't know, relaxers, when you use like a chemical product on your hair to straighten it.
Okay.
And I remember, because relaxers can be very excruciating. Okay. The longer you leave them on, the more it like burns and it hurts. And I remember like crying, being in tears and being like, Mom, I don't want to have this in my hair anymore. And her being like, we have to sit for 5 more minutes. Like, I'm sorry it burns. You're just gonna have to deal with it. And then like having chemical burns from like leaving it in too long. It was the worst. But then when I was like in my early 20s, that's when like the natural hair movement really started. And I was like, oh wow, like I really want to do this, but had no clue what I was doing. Because I mean, if I ever went to like a black hairstylist, it was just to get a relaxer. That was it. And so I went natural on my own. I just stopped getting relaxers. Eventually got like my ends cut off so I could and the first go around, I was probably natural for about 2 years before I was like, I can't do this. I have no idea what I'm doing. I know nothing about my hair type. I don't know anything about this. And I felt it led into that imposter syndrome of like, how can I be out here with this natural hair and I know nothing about having natural hair. I know nothing about what it is to be black with natural hair. So I went natural for like 2 years and then got a relaxer. And I remember, so my best friend in college who was white, one day when I was natural, she was like, do you want to hang out? And I was like, no, today's wash day. And she was like, I don't understand. And I was like, it's wash day. She was like, I don't get it. And I was like, wash day is a whole day process. I'm not going nowhere. And so she was like, but like, does it take that long? And so I walked her through my whole wash day process. And she was like, this is insane. And she was like, you have to do this every week. And I was like, now do you understand why I want to get a relaxer? And she was like, yes, I do. So got a relaxer. And then I think it was only, I guess probably about 5 years ago. So right before COVID, that I went natural again and have been natural since. And so now every single time I want to get a relaxer, I just tell myself like, it's a journey. Like your hair is going through a journey. Like you just have to figure out what works for you. Plus now that I have a child, my son has beautiful curly hair and I feel like, so I didn't have that growing up. Like I didn't have someone who had hair like mine growing up. And so I was like, I feel like to him, if I get a relaxer that's telling him your hair is not beautiful, and I don't want to do that because his hair is beautiful. So
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm bald, and but that's okay. I have thoughts. Right? So I wasn't always bald.
Okay.
So let me just paint the picture for you for a little bit here. So like picture like 2003, right? Like 2003, the Pistons are doing great, and my idol Ben Wallace had afro, right? And I was like, I'm gonna grow an afro because up to that point, my parents always kept it shaved, never bald but shaved. And I remember like growing my hair out for a year, and it was beautiful. It was luscious. And we go to my barber. Her name is Denise, black woman, absolutely love her. And I think she knows what she's doing. I've never had an issue with her. And she's like, okay, you want to get it braided, so like, you got to get it relaxed. We can like do this. I was like, great, awesome. So we do that. Hair's ready. So I was coming in the next day to get it like braided, right? Because I was so ready to have the cornrows because that's all I wanted. And she's not there. Oh no. Yes, she's not there. And another woman is like, well, his hair can't be done. Like he only has it relaxed. He needs to get it permed. In the span of 24 hours, I had my hair relaxed and then permed. And I'm not kidding you when I tell you, within a year, my hair started to fall out. My hairline had receded by the time I was in high school to like here. And my hairline now, in the year 0 of 2024, is here. So I keep it bald for that reason. I would too. Yeah, I mean, there's no, like,
Brother, I love you, man.
No, you're good.
We bonded on
Yeah.
break, but
woo! That's what I'm saying. Like, I got like a 7 head. Like, it's just like we're gonna have to deal with what we gotta deal with. And I'll never forget the turning point was I was 19 and I was a waiter at the time, and my table just roasted me. They gave me a nice tip, but they just roasted me for having a messed up hairline. And I was like, you know what, fine, like whatever, we'll just be bald, and it's fine. But to the second part of the question, like I just wish my parents had known that you cannot do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I wish that I hadn't been like their first and only at that time, the only black child that they had, because before my dad had remarried, I was the only black child in the family. And so, they were doing the best they could with what they had, but Lord help us, why did I have to be the guinea pig?
right.
Right.
But when my dad remarried, and I gained a bunch of black siblings, which was really great to see, I really began to understand, like, they take great pride in their hair, right? To your point about wash day being an entire day, I have a lot of sisters. It wasn't just that it was an entire day. I'm like, this is a whole to-do. Like, they have a schedule. They're up at like 8. We're doing this. They have someone coming over to do their hair. I was like, who's taking me to football? One of you?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
But it was a whole thing. But it was really cool to see the things they could do with their hair. Like, we had braids. We had some who, my sister Tiara is natural. My sister Toy prefers braids. Faith is natural. Like, it's really cool to see them as kids, when we were kids, and now as we're all like, different shades of adults, to kind of see the pride they take in their hair. And I really appreciate the larger just movement that we've had in the Black and brown community to embrace that, right? We've got things like the Crown Act that says we're not going to discriminate because you choose to wear your hair in a certain way. I think that's a part of your self-expression, your self-identity. And even though I can't grow hair on my head in any meaningful capacity, I do have a beard from time to time. Like I only recently shaved it because I lived in DC until the fall, and it's just too hot to have it in the summer. If anyone's been to DC, it's disgustingly hot in the fall, in the summer. But like even having my beard is a way of self-expression because I can style my beard. If I want to color my beard, sometimes I'll do that. I have all the goops and creams and all these things, and like I take a massive amount of pride in that. And I really appreciate the Black community has like reclaimed that for ourselves to say like this natural hair that we choose to have, or the way that we choose to do our hair. Like look at those photos from like years and years and years ago of those kings and those queens and like this hair, like. And I think that bothers people to say like we know where we come from, we know we are kings and queens of the African continent, and like I think that bothers folks. But I really love that we're like screw you, we're doing it anyway. And like I love that that's such a cultural piece for us. And you know, should I be blessed to have children, please let them inherit their mother's hair, or like at least let my messed up hair genes not be messed up in whoever comes. I'm really gonna embrace that with them and say like wear your hair the way that you want to. If you want it to be shaved, we'll shave it. If you want to grow it, grow it. Because my parents did make the executive decision to kind of keep it short throughout my life until I pushed back and said I want to have an afro. You know, and be willing to do that work too, right? Like that's, I will say that, like doing your hair is a labor of love. Yes. And so if you want to do it, be willing to do that work. But I really think people are, you know.
And it costs some money.
Yes, it does.
It does.
Well, honey, you hearing this? It costs some money. Okay. So,
and no, it's not too much.
That's right.
No. Yeah, hey, I just have to say your head is perfect for
Thank you.
It is.
Yes.
It is great. Yeah. And I was just playing with you when
No, I know.
I think what's so weird about it is, so my oldest brother in my adoptive family, he was my mom's son from her first marriage, and she was married to a Black man, so he's biracial. And my brother was always allowed to wear his hair however he wanted, but when it came to me, I had to get relaxers. Like I didn't have a choice. And so I don't know if it was just because of like a gender thing, because maybe she thought male hair, like it's more acceptable for him to wear his hair like that than it would be for me. But even like when it started, like if I'd get a relaxer and it started to get curly, she's like, we need to put another perm on your hair, like it's getting nappy. And I'm like, ooh, okay. So yeah.
And the reality is that there have been long-term consequences, right, to chemical relaxers and process that now is coming to light that this wasn't the best thing for Black and brown people. But the reality is that natural hair needs to be embraced. And yes, our hair is our crown. And yes, the cultural significance and the history, all of it, you should be giving your children those experiences. And again, pressing into the uncomfortable. Yes, you're going to have to budget for hair care. Okay? Yes, you're going to have to place yourself in an uncomfortable situation where you might be in an all-black salon and you might be the only white person sitting there. And you have to be okay with that. And I'm going to go as far as to say that if you're not okay with it, then let's consider whether or not this is the right path for you. Okay? Because there are long-term consequences. And I've been in doing this long enough to see what the consequences are. And you can cause some long-term damage for a child when you're not embracing hair and its cultural significance as a part of who they are and who they're developing to be.
So years ago, I did it for probably 5-6 years. I would bring an adopted kid into a barbershop, and you could see the look on his face. And you bring him in, and the barber at the time, he knew about it, and he was all excited, and get his hair all done up, nice fade, line him up, and bring him back home, and the change, the confidence, he loved it. Now here's the thing, I would tell the parents, hey, Dad, what? You're coming next time. You're taking him. And they'd be like, well, you could just pick him up, right? When next time you go, I'm like, no, it's not how it goes. I'm going to bring him. So now that the barber knows what his haircut looks like, and guess what? His dad, who loves him, who adopted him, is going to come support him with one of the most important things in this child's life.
That's right.
And you're going to sit there, okay? I had parents embrace that. I had parents say, okay, and they would bring them, and then they would go wait outside, right? And they'd go sit in the car, right? And I would get a phone call, or I get a text, and I'd say, hey, he's sitting outside. Well, you don't want me showing up, right? So I would ask how'd it go, and I'm like, so you were sitting in the chair? No, I had to do some work. I don't care. Spend 45 minutes to an hour. And if it's me, it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours, because I talk a lot. And spend some time with your child. And actually, maybe you should get your hair cut too, because guess what? Barbershops they can cut white people's hair. They can. And it's just that kind of thing it's something this child owns now, right? It's his. And the look on their face is something that it's how I felt when I was 22 walking out. And it was like, I finally did it. This is it. This is who I am. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And I think for adopted parents, embrace that. Once your child, you're going to love it. You're going to see the look on their face. It's going to change a lot of who that person is, that child is.
You show your child how much you value them.
Amen.
and their
I love that.
I was going to
experience.
say that's something I talk about with adoptive families all the time. I'm like, your child will remember that you were not there.
Yeah.
And that will tell them that they were not a priority to you. And if you love this kid and they are a priority to you, then you have to show up every time. You have to show up.
So good. That's
I mean,
so
I remember my dad, Midwestern white dad, right, going to the first black barbershop, which we went to when I was in high school. And I just remember, it's like this little hole in the wall shop, great folks in there. And I just remember him looking at this like, this is where, But he walked in, and I tell you, he acted like he knew those guys forever by the time we walked out. And like to your point around like they can cut white hair too. My dad, that was his barber from now on, and that was something that I thought was really special. That like myself, my brother, my younger brother Sean, and my dad, like the only men in the house, were like, we go to a black barbershop and like we have a great time. And to your point, we're sitting there chatting about like the sports or what have you. And I remember I told him I was going on a date, and then I was like, I got you. I'm gonna line you up so good. And it was, but you need those places where you can just be authentically yourself. In community with other black people, because like I love my dad, but he wouldn't have been like, yes, you should probably get a lineup and do all these things. Like if you want to impress someone, like he doesn't have that perception because he's got different hair, almost like a different standard of what they think is acceptable of like, you know, and to have out there. So it was really cool to your point. Like I can remember my dad showing up for me in that way and like showing me that he could get past that uncomfortability, because I can tell it was uncomfortable for him, but he's like, my boys are here, like we're gonna make this work, and so it was really cool.
Children learn by seeing their parents do it. So if you are uncomfortable and can't sit in it, you will then have a child who grows up to be an adult who also can't sit in uncomfortability.
Oh man, that was a great point. So at what age did you or would you have appreciated a place to process your experience, whether through an adoptee group, an adoption competent therapist, or some other form of support?
I mean, it's never too early. I can say I didn't start therapy until I was about 14. But I think that was more brought on just by other factors. It was never like because I was adopted or racialized, anything like that. But I think, you know, when I was around 10 years old, it was very apparent that I was black, and started to dig into my adoption, you know, background. I think that was when I would have liked to have started having it. You know, and it's sad that I never really feel like I ever had like adoption competent therapists growing up, which is what attracted me to be a part of the Center for Adoption Support and Education at CASE. Like I'm the chairman of their advisory board, and like we do a lot around adoption competency. Like I'm helping them design a course for clinicians, but like what does it actually mean? Take it from someone with lived experience. This is what adoption competency should look like. Because I don't ever want children to be in the space where I didn't have those supports and those services, because you do so much damage when you can't get that support that you need, right? To the point that you had raised, you internalize a lot of this. And like, I'm still working through some of what I would consider like my own internalized racism. It's like, why do I assume that this is what it is because of this, right? Like, I hate that, you know, especially because like when you get older, you're smart enough to recognize that you're doing it, and you've got to like consciously unlearn those those thoughts. And so I would argue as soon as your child starts to display a need for that, and I think that'll be different for everyone, but for me, I think it would have been around age 10. But I also respect, like, even though I'm 30, it's never too late to get one.
That's what I was gonna say, right? I went through counseling. I mean, I would probably say starting at 8, 9, and it wasn't just it. Parents need to realize adoption. The child, that's trauma, right? And if there's anything else that goes on in the family, right? That's another thing, trauma, right? Your parents divorce. You know where your parents were divorced too? No, but your parents
No,
divorced.
not divorced. Died.
Died. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Died. Trauma.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, you
Yeah,
lose
yeah.
somebody, right? My older brother, I was physically abused growing up. Okay, he was also a racist. Okay, then you have someone like my wife, adopted, parents divorced, trauma, right? And you think of all these things, and it can just keep adding up, and I'm realizing things now. I'm 38, 30, almost 39, because of a counselor that I've been going to now. And it's something that I'm like, light bulb. And I remember I talked to her. Me and Tamika had lunch, and I had to tell her about this. And I was like, this has been going on. Like, there are things that I blocked out. The joy in my life, the joy my parents did for me, and they tried to do, because my brain, which is, they call it an amygdala, right? I have an enlarged amygdala. And it blocks out a lot of the good. I am very susceptible for just like remembering only trauma in my life. I only remember the bad, and it's sad. And I'm like, my mom had to show me some pictures recently of the things that they did to try to help me with my birth parents, my birth mom, birth grandparents. I don't remember that. I truly do not remember that. And I got on here on the podcast and I said, they didn't do anything. And she's like, no, we did. Here. And I do not remember it at all for years and years and years and years. And that's what I'm saying. Like, start young, and it's okay. And it's okay. It's, you're giving that child a support system also to talk and to open up. And parents, you don't need to huddle around it, right? You don't need to be involved, really. You just love. So
I tell parents all the time, I'm like, when they're like, when do we start talking to our kiddo about adoption? I'm like, as soon as possible. As soon as possible. Because the more you normalize it, if you start young, then those conversations will just come up like it's nothing. And that uncomfortability will slowly go away because you're having those conversations all the time. The thing about kids is that they're so naturally curious, but also just like very go with the flow. They might have one question, you answer that one question, they've moved on. That's all they, and so I tell parents, I'm like, just answer the question they're asking you right now. Because they'll say like, well, what if they ask this and I answer this way, and then they ask this, and I'm like, you can't build that in your head and think that that's what's going to happen. Start with the one question you know that they're going to ask, answer it, and then just leave it. Either they will ask more questions or they won't. But just be there. Just be there. That's all you got to do. And just, I try to like normalize it for them that like, it's also okay to say that you don't know. And say like, hey, I don't know the answer to that. Let's do some research together. Because that says you're important to me. And not only do I want to know, but you want to know. So like, let's figure this out together. That's a great way for you to figure it out, and also a great way to show your kid that you actually really care. So like, don't be afraid to do it. My parents, I don't think we ever really had those conversations. Like, I think when I was 13, that's when my parents told me like the full adoption story. Because they felt like I was old enough to understand. But in terms of talking about like how my race played into like growing up the way that I did, we never like, it wasn't talked about. So I just assumed like it's just normal, you know, like you just don't talk about those things. So when I had friends in high school that would ask, like, what's it like to grow up in a white family? And I'm like, I don't know. What's it like to grow up in your family? Like, because it wasn't ever like brought up like that, I never was made to think like, oh no, something is wrong here. Like, this isn't right. And it wasn't until like I got into adulthood and of course started seeing a therapist that I'm like, something's wrong here. Maybe we should have talked about this a little bit more.
So it sounds like you had your like full, your parents at least had your full adoption story, which I think which is a blessing, because I think there's also this understanding like a lot of times you're not going to have that, which is even more important for you to say I don't know. Like my parents don't know, right? Like even though my stepmother, who my dad remarried, was my foster care caseworker, which is kind of weird how all of that worked out. But like, you know, the information that she had ended up not being true, right? Because like you can say whatever you want when you're into 1994 in Detroit. You say whatever you want, apparently.
Yes.
Like my parents would come up with like theories and all these things, and that like kind of, you know, so in my mind I have like this built up expectation of like, this is what my biological father looks like, and this is what my biological mother looks like, and realizing that now, like they pulled it out of thin air, like who do, you know, like. But I feel like that's going to hurt me when I do decide to go do this work. One day I'll decide I want to go and like figure out who these people are. Like, I don't feel like I need to do that today, but like just their theories, I think did more harm than good. And I know they meant to do well by it. Like, I don't think they intended to cause harm, but as I've gotten older, I realized like you've created a picture for me that nothing's ever going to live up to. And I'm going to have to work through that emotionally one day. Which is maybe why I haven't done it. Cause I'm like, I don't want to work through that. I don't want to do the work right now. And so, you know, a shout out to all of those kids out there who don't have that background and don't have that knowledge. And like to the parents who are going to have that difficult conversation, please have that conversation. Don't lie to them to make them feel better, because long term, it's only going to make them feel worse. And I'm just delaying the inevitable at this time.
Well, and while I would say, yes, I was given a story. When I was in my early 20s, I requested my records from the state.
Okay.
And I remember getting them. And so I'd been told this story like since I was 13. So like this was the story I grew to believe. And then I read on paper and I was like, wait, that's not at all how that happened. And I'm like, I don't understand. I thought like this is what I was told, and it wasn't like it was just bits and pieces that were different. The whole thing was different. And so then I felt like you lied to me. And now based on what you've told me, I developed this preconceived idea of my own birth parents and my own birth family because of what you told me, when nothing was ever like that. And so I remember the feeling of thinking like, you made me think that I should hate this woman who gave me life when she never did anything wrong.
Yeah.
She didn't. It was just poor, awful circumstances.
Say it again.
And so, yeah, I remember having, like, it was hard to reconcile with the fact that, like, this is the story. Like, I grew up, very viscerally, like, having a reaction to, like, hating this woman.
Really?
And then reading this and thinking, like, wow, I feel so awful. I've spent so much of my life carrying that with me. And for what?
Right.
This is so good. This is so invaluable information that you guys are giving parents out there. And we are not going to stop it. I know we're going to go over time. We're just going to go over time today. Okay.
I'm letting you know right now. I've asked if we can go over time before. She's like, we're never going over time.
We're going over time.
We're never
today.
going over time.
We're
We're
going
never.
over
I'm
time
like,
today.
and now I'm like, okay, I'll remember this. I
Were there
love this.
specific moments or life stages when you felt the need for more emotional support regarding your adoption and racial identity, and how did you handle it personally, whether or not as a child or an adult?
I mean, 2020 was just a hot cluster for the entire world. But I can remember that was probably the most recent time in my adult life where I was like, I need some support here. Like, the world is on fire. I lost my dad to COVID in like April 2020, so like very early COVID days. And like that was, even though I have a stepmom who I love, who's literally known me longer than my parents knew me, it was a situation where I kind of felt like orphaned. And I was like, wow, like I don't have any legal parents who had like a legal responsibility to like care for me. Not that my stepmom like stopped, and she's fantastic. But that was the first time I was like, I need to get some support here. And I was fortunate that when I was kind of Googling around and like navigating health benefits, because I had my first like big boy job, I came across a group called Black Foster Youth Lives Matter. And it was really an interesting space to kind of be in, to be with other people who had similar backgrounds to me. And like, of course, we had like George Floyd, right? And so like really dealing with that intersection of like child welfare, adoption, being Black, being a male, and what does that all kind of look like? And so that was what got me back into therapy. And so I ended up kind of, being in therapy, getting the psychiatric support that I needed, right? Because there's no shame in saying that your serotonin comes from a bottle. Listen, I will take my, Prozac any day of the week, okay? It's good for you.
Save for the people in the back.
Okay. It tastes good. All right. But I can remember just needing that level of support, and getting in, like, just dealing with this identity of, of like, what does it just mean to be a Black man in this country, and then how do you compound that with the additional trauma of being an adopted, right, person? I really appreciate the point that you raised here is like adoption, foster care, all that is trauma. And like your body carries that whether you recognize it or not. And so I was very fortunate to find a Black woman who was no nonsense. Like, we're going to do the work. Like, you're going to be uncomfortable and you're going to be mad at me, but you're going to do this work. And so from 2020 up until I went to grad school in 2023, like I was getting, counseling services at least once a week. And it was really helpful. And it was just dealing with stuff like, what does your identity mean to you? You get to define that. I remember one of the biggest pieces of homework I had was like, you have to celebrate your birthday. And I was just like, it was never a big deal growing up for me. I don't think it's important. And it's like, no, it's your birthday. You got to do it. And I was like, what do I do? She's like, whatever you want, you have to do something. I was like, what if I buy cakes? Like, then buy cake. Like, but like having to navigate, all of those different pieces was something that I'm very thankful I had to do. And like, just learning to take it one day at a time ever since then. But yeah, I really think 2020 was kind of the impetus to get back into it, having not done it since I had been 16 prior. So it'd been a good, 10-year gap. So
I think for me, so it was probably 2013. My adopted mom passed away unexpectedly. I was in my first semester of my sophomore year of college, and it was right before Thanksgiving break. So went home, and my mom was kind of like the glue that like held our family together. So after she passed away, it was not only like seeing our family kind of unravel, but then feeling like, was I ever meant to be a part of this family? Like, without her, should I have been here? Because now it seems like without mom, like, and really thinking back on it, my dad did say one day she just came home and was like, we're going to adopt this child. And my dad was like, okay. So it does seem like it was probably mostly her plan, but it made me like I had to do a lot of soul searching. Like, do I belong here? And if not here, then where do I belong? And I think that's what led me to like requesting my records, because I was like, if I don't belong here, I have to find out where I belong. And so like, that's when my therapy journey kind of started as well. And trying to navigate through, I think you had mentioned like you had experienced abuse. It wasn't until I was in therapy that I realized like there were some things after my mom passed away that I was like, was this abuse? And I remember like being just before my mom's funeral talking with my older sister, and she was like, no, mom was really abusive to you when we were little. And I was like, so you knew, like you saw it too. And I remember thinking like that I was crazy, because I was like, I feel like this is going on and this isn't right, but we're all just not talking about it. And so like going through that journey of therapy, then for my therapist to be like, both can be true. Yeah. You can love her and still be upset with the things that she did and not agree with those things. And so I think I had a hard time. A lot of therapy was spent trying to reconcile those feelings of anger, but also those feelings of love. Yeah. And like you said, adoption is trauma. One of the things I explain to parents all the time is the idea of adoption is a form of ambiguous loss.
yes.
Because while the person is not physically gone, they're with you. So there's a loss there, and there's a sense of disenfranchised grief that you experience because you're not able to openly mourn, because adoption is supposed to be beautiful. So you're not able to mourn that you have now lost this family. And so, yeah, I always explain, I'm like, for that adoption alone, Your children need to be in therapy.
Yeah. Wow.
Luke.
Yeah. For me, it was high school. Going from homeschool to public. You know, I'm with my mom every day. Then I go to public where there is a mix of kids of color. Then you go to a private school where it's me, probably 10 other black kids, and like 7 of them were also adopted.
Wow.
So we were all feeling with the same thing. And me being an athlete, it was very evident that I was very important to the school. And they would say, a lot of people would say things, and such as, "You're not really black," or you ever call me radio on the baseball field, right? Or I'd always use my dad, who I love, he's no longer here, but we always use who he was if I needed to date a girl, right? A white girl. And they say, this is what my dad does, right? Because it was in my head, nobody wants a black person to be around their daughter. No one really wants their kids to be friends with a black kid. But I'm only here because of sports. And I wouldn't talk to any of the other black kids. But I wanted to. I wanted that connection so bad. And that I needed, and I wish there was intervention. I wish someone would have grabbed my hand and been like, hey, let me help you. There's a time when there were some kids, it was a Halloween, and I didn't dress up anything, and I think I was like a farmer. I did. I was like a farmer. I don't know. And some kids put red marker on my back.
Oh, wow.
Right? Now, here's the thing, is this. I was so disconnected. I didn't understand. And then the black kids pulled me aside. And it was the most traumatic time at that school. And I wish I would have known and been educated on the history, right? And for that, I just kind of just pushed my ethnicity aside, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to be Luke Mitchell, the athlete, not recognize who I am and and my skin, because guess what? I'm a joke to the white groups. I'm an imposter to the black groups. So I'm just going to keep being the best athlete here. And they'll just accept me for who that is. Yeah. But I wish somebody would have just said to me, hey, I need you to understand this. I need you to stick up for yourself this way. I need you to, if someone says something to you, I need you to say, hey, that ain't right. That hurts because of this. Yeah, it was during my high school time. That was the hardest time for me. Wow. Which then escalated it all the way till I was 22, never wanting to, because I was afraid I was going to say the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yep.
I was afraid I was going to wear the wrong clothes. I was afraid. I was just afraid. That's why I barbecue a lot. It's like I'm getting back what I missed, what I've lost. It's why I love. We've gone away. This society has gone away from, and especially the suburbs, of like potlucks and gatherings. And you go to somewhere in the South, that's what they do.
Yeah, deep in our
And
culture.
and
Yeah, we're communal.
yes, and like that's why everyone come over. I'm gonna feed you, and I'm getting back what I lost, and I think that's it's good for my kids to to see.
Yeah.
But it's also still doing something in here.
Yeah.
Healing.
It's healing.
It's healing.
It's healing.
Yes.
But then again, I'm still like with that. I still got a lot more healing to do. You know, this is what this is for.
Yeah.
This is what this is for.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad I got to meet you guys. Like
You guys are amazing.
Luke, real fast, that brings up two things for me. First is like this notion of like you're trying to get it back. I love that. And I think,
love it too.
you know, it's a phrase, I didn't come up with this, but someone has said it to me, is that adoption gave me so many things,
Yes.
but it also took away things I will never get back. And I really appreciate that you're trying to do the work to get some of that back, whatever that looks like for you, right? And I love that. And the second part that you raised, I think, is something that all, especially transracial adoptees, but adoptees probably more general too, is we have to divorce a part of ourselves. Like society is asking us to divorce part of ourselves to fit into whatever it is they want us to fit into. Like similar to you, I went to private school, and very similar. It's like I am not Tony the black man. I am Tony the straight A student. I'm Tony the kid who does theater. I'm Tony the student body president. But like if I do all of these things, maybe they'll forget that I'm black, right? And
it's
I.
like the being black was not a part of your identity.
Exactly, being black
Everything
was not
else
a part
was,
of it.
but being black was not a part of your identity.
Exactly. And I think society expects that of us more generally, not just adoptees, but as black individuals. They expect us to play like you can be black when it's convenient for us as society to say you can be black today.
Yes.
And I think we need to do more, not just with like our adoptees, but as a group of black people in this country to claim our blackness and say like, this is a indistinguishable part of who we are. Because when you were called radio, I was called an Oreo. Like
Same.
I
yeah, same
can't,
here.
the amount of
Oh,
times that I was called America's favorite cookie, like will stick with me forever because it's like, why does the way I speak or present code white to you?
Right.
Like, can I be a black man who's articulate? Like,
Right.
why can't I be these things, right? Why is this a white standard that was being set for us? And what bothers me is even my family would say it to me thinking it was a compliment. And I think in their white mind, it was a compliment. But it's such a backhanded, microaggressive compliment that I can't.
You were so well spoken.
So well spoken.
well
Yes,
spoken.
you're
So
so
articulate.
Have you guys noticed? Have you guys noticed? If you listen to announcers, and they talk about a football player or whatever, kid happens to be a straight A student. He happens to be a straight A student. He happens to be this. He happens to be that. But you go to a white they do the same thing. They're not going to mention his grades. They're not going to mention.
That's right.
And it's this trying to lift up. Even announcers, they try to lift up the black players, black students. Guess what? We already lifting up ourselves. Like
Right.
we're good. We're good.
That's right.
And articulate, like I think that's when people always say, "Oh, you're so articulate." Very blue
They
collar.
tell me that too.
I'm very blue collar, right? And they're like, "Oh, you're very articulate." I'm like you weren't raised in the city. And I'm like, "You're right, it wasn't." It's the same thing if you go down to Texas and you hear you go on a ranch and you hear somebody, right, in the South, right? It's different. Would you what? Different dialect? Different dialect.
Yeah.
And I just think we need to get away from how someone talks, how someone acts, how someone this. It's really who that person is, right? And being comfortable with my skin. I love my skin.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want it anyway, other way. So
Well, I want to address this articulate comment. And y'all know me. I'm just going to say what I think.
Say it with your chest, girl. Say it with your chest.
But, it's almost the expectation. I feel like when it's said to me, and I grew up in the city on the south side of Chicago.
Hey,
okay? And yes, I went to a predominantly white university because I had to learn how to make it in the world. Okay? Even though I went to all black school growing up in the hood. Okay? But I feel like there's an automatic assumption about black people that if you are educated, it's almost like there's an expectation that you wouldn't be.
Yep.
And that's the part where it becomes offensive to me because you're assuming something without even knowing who I really am.
That's right.
Or any part of my story, which is where it becomes a problem for me. right? And I mean, I can only imagine how it is for you guys as adoptees. But I know as a Black woman, I'm automatically offended when people say it to me. So parents out there, be aware of how it could be making your adoptive child or child in foster care feel when those comments are being made about them, and be advocates in your community. That's not okay. Okay? And you can't know these things unless you're educating yourself, number one, or placing yourself in an environment around people where they're going to be able to tell you, hey, that wasn't okay.
And be open to that. When you get that heat,
Yes.
you got to be
Right.
open to taking that heat because
Absolutely.
you were in the wrong.
Right.
Like, and if you weren't, someone will come into your defense and tell you weren't. But 9 times out of 10, if you catching heat for saying something like that, we're saying it angrily, but we're saying it with love, so you don't keep saying it.
Right.
Like, don't gaslight us and say that, oh, I didn't say it. It's like, girl, I heard you say it.
heard you say it.
Like,
Yeah.
like you said it to my
now.
face. Like,
I was
you know?
here.
Yep.
Like,
my daughter's 8, and I've told her there's a book out there. Please don't touch my hair.
I've seen it.
You have that
I've
book?
seen that.
And we've read it over and over and over again. And the people who sit there and touch her hair, she's got naturally curly hair. It's gorgeous hair, and she found like people were grabbing her hair. It's like, oh, I love this, and she just goes, "Please don't touch my hair."
Yeah.
And they like look,
Good.
"Please don't touch my hair." And she looks at me, and she knows, Dad, you got my back. And I said, "Hey, she asked you not to touch her hair.
Yeah.
Don't touch her hair, and here's why."
See, and that's something that like my parents didn't do for me. So like I'd have my white friends putting their hands on my hair, and then because you got oils and everything else, they're like, "Oh, that's so gross," and I'm like, "Well, nobody asked you to put your hands in my hair."
Say it again,
Like,
right?
Yeah.
this is not a petting zoo. I'm not an animal. I'm a person.
Yes.
You don't see me put
That
my hands
part.
in your hair.
The only people who can touch my head without like asking is a baby because they're a baby.
Right.
Like even my partner will ask, "Can I rub your head?" Right? Because it's a sign of respect.
Right.
Like,
Right. You don't just go putting your hands in somebody's
right.
hair.
Right. But I think that also goes to the fact that we are still viewed as less than human in this country. Right. Like to your point, this is not a petting zoo. Please. For white people, they probably think that we can be still, right? Like, especially as we kind of consider, like, what half of this country believes, Project 2025, right? Like, it makes me sad that, like, in 2024, we're still in a place where people think it's okay. And they're like, oh, I think it's so beautiful. I'm like, you can look with your eyes. Your hands don't have eyes. Like,
That's right. And adoptive parents and parents who are fostering children, you need to be aware of these things, and you have to have the boldness to speak it out of your mouth. You cannot be afraid to have those conversations with your family,
Especially
with your
because
friends.
children,
Especially with your
children
family,
can't
yeah.
always speak up for themselves,
That's right.
and you're the advocate for them. And if you don't advocate for them, they won't learn to advocate for
That's
themselves.
right.
My
is
daughter,
right.
there's somebody who keeps saying she's brown, and she will be like, "I'm black," and she'll be like, "No, you're brown. No, I'm black."
I'm black.
And then she'll look at Dad, and I'll be like, "Black." Conversation over. But the fact is, she has that
That's security.
ownership, that security,
I love that.
and yeah, it's something. It's beautiful, something very beautiful.
I love that you have her back, right? Like that is the key part. Is I think a lot of adoptees, a lot of children in general, their parents don't have their back in the way that you have your child's back. Where it's just like black over. Like I'm like that is how many times I think we all think of times where we just wish our parent had our back in that
right.
moment.
So many.
Yes.
Like
Well, most of the time, my parents were like, "You got in trouble. Like you did that. Like I don't get your back. Like, you know what I mean?" And so most of the time, I'd be like, "I swear I didn't do that," and be like, "No, you did." I'm like, "No, But that's something that's something huge for me, is to have her back.
Well, and she'll remember that
yeah.
for years. That security of knowing, like, no matter who doubted me, my dad always had my
that's
back.
right.
Yes.
Yes.
And woof, this podcast, man.
This family,
We
all
gotta bring it in.
We
gotta
do.
bring
My
it
wife is out there.
Reel
My kids are out there. My wife's out there, and I told them an hour. She's sitting there like, okay.
We gotta wrap it up, but
Yeah.
one piece of advice. Let's just wrap it up with one piece of advice. And while you're wrapping up, just kind of give people how they can contact you, just in case they have questions or they want to explore this conversation with you further. We want them to be able to contact you. But as you're wrapping up as part of this, I feel like give them one practical thing that they can do to continue this conversation, because we want them to know, we want parents out there to know that if you're going to continue this conversation, you want to have it early and often. All the things that you guys are telling them, how can they make that part of their regular routine in your closing comments? If you could just include that.
Okay, I'll go. I would say start in your community. It doesn't have to be a lot. Find one person there. Find one person there that you can connect with. Share your story with them. Share the story of your child. But build a relationship, because it'll start there. Build that one relationship that will grow into many others. And create that community, because if you don't already have it, you're going to have to go out and create it. So build that community for your kid, I think, is like my piece of advice.
Okay, and how can we contact you?
You can reach me through email if you'd like, kianteconger@gmail.com.
Great.
I think one practical piece of advice is you got to do the work. Like, honestly, take any question your child's going to ask you and Google it. Do that research, because it's going to open you up to so much more and such a richer depth of information that you might not have had. And I think that is where you're going to start to kind of work through your uncomfortability with this, is when you get the education that you need behind you, right? I think it's super important to remember adoption is a lifelong learning journey for everybody involved in that. And so you've got to be willing to do that education. So that's my personal practical piece of advice. And if you want to reach out to me, my email is robertaparsons94@gmail.com, or I'm also on LinkedIn, Robert A. Parsons, and I'm also on Instagram at Emperor Parsons. Little step up from being president, but you feel free to reach out to me on any of those platforms, and I'd love to talk with you further.
I think echoing all of that, I think your community, but also make it natural, right? So if you're thinking about fostering or even adopting, start the work before, so that it's natural, because kids can see, right? Kids can see and they can feel. This is weird. We only hang out with them during certain times, and it's really, you're really kind of pushing me to hang out with someone who looks like me, right? But if you really want to make a commitment to a child for the rest of its life that doesn't look like you, and is a child of color, you need to surround, I'm not saying your whole community, but your friends and your family, they need to have some people that might look like them. And also, it's going to help you to be able to have those uncomfortable conversations, because if you don't know it, you can send them to one of your friends that loves them already and say, hey, can you talk to them about this? Can you direct them in a right way? And it can kind of be a whole family thing. So start the work before. And if you haven't, start the work now. Embrace the uncomfortable, and charge right at it. So
Sounds good. Well, you can reach us at heritagetalks@gmail.com, and I'm looking forward to exploring the next Heritage Talks with you for Black History Month. So you guys want to stay tuned in, and thank you for following Heritage Talks. Have a great one.